Welcome to the Neurosurgeon's Journey, part of the library of Brain and Spine Group's Medical Student Neurosurgery Training Center and a collaboration with the AANS's Young Neurosurgeons Committee. I'm your co-host, Michael Kortz. I'm currently the Senior Student Director of Education Resources for MSNTC, and shortly we'll be joined by your other co-host, Dr. Jeremiah Johnson. He is an Assistant Professor of Neurosurgery at the Baylor College of Medicine and is the current chair of the YNC. We're happy to have you with us as we look deeper into the rewarding life of a neurosurgeon and explore what it takes to get there. All right. Dr. Johnson, how are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's great to be back. Our guest for today is Monica Mureb. She's from Westchester, New York. She completed her medical school at New York Institute of Technology and did a year of research during medical school at NYU. She's now first-year neurosurgery resident at Westchester Medical Center and New York Medical College, and is currently interested in an endovascular career. I feel like we've had a lot of people that are interested in endovascular lately. Monica, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you on. So our topic today is part of our resident application perspective series, talking about what students without home programs should be cognizant of as they go through the neurosurgery application process and the unique challenges of what that looks like. And we're happy to have you on. You have a fresh and unique perspective, just matching as well as going through the process recently and having a lot of good thoughts on that. So we're happy to have you on, and we're excited to have your expertise in this conversation. And yeah, Dr. Johnson, do you have any thoughts on it? I know certainly from the YNC perspective, you operate in circles with a lot of different physicians and students, and I didn't know if you had any initial thoughts about the topic for today.
Yeah, I think maybe the place to start is just for listeners that may not quite understand why this is an important topic, is that, and I'm happy to have either Michael or Monica jump in anytime, but essentially the problem for those who are not familiar with it, with trying to match in neurosurgery, if you're not at a medical school that has a neurosurgery training program, is that you're a bit of a disadvantage compared to students who have a training program at their institution, because much of neurosurgery is related to exposure to neurosurgeons who know other neurosurgeons, as well as you're much more likely to match at your own program, assuming you guys like each other. You kind of have an inside track into obtaining a position at your own program. Now, people that are at medical schools that don't have programs, so I don't remember exactly the number of medical schools in the country, but I know there's like just over 100 medical student neurosurgery training programs at medical schools, right? So I would imagine there's like 150 medical schools plus, and there's like 100-ish medical, neurosurgery.
There's 112 programs.
Yeah, something like that. So I imagine the number of medical schools is much higher than that around the country. So there's this group who is interested in neurosurgery, but A, they have a hard time finding exposure to it if they are interested to it. And B, it's a bit of a challenge to match into neurosurgery without the sort of making the connections of well-known, for lack of a better word, well-connected neurosurgeons that can kind of propel them to match, saying this is a good person to everyone else in the country via letters of recommendation, et cetera. Furthermore, one of the keys to matching statistically is to have, a significant amount of research, and EFS research is in neurosurgery is an advantage as well. I think, although a minor one, it is an advantage. So if you don't have a home program at your institution, you may not have exposure to research opportunities that will help your CV. So those are kind of the background for those listening who may not be familiar with why we're talking about this, of this subgroup of people that are interested in neurosurgery that don't have a home program, and what strategies you can use to kind of get around some of those limitations.
Yeah. As always, you eloquently describe why the topic is important. And I think for Monica and I also come from a medical school that doesn't have a home program. So this is close to home for me. So Monica, just to start out from your perspective, I think I described your academic career. I summarized it for the last 8 years or so, but why don't you go beyond that? Why were you interested in neurosurgery? Tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. Well, as you can tell from my history, I'm a New Yorker through and through. And part of the reason I've stayed in New York my whole life is because so much of my support system has been here, not only my family, but the people who have supported my career. My interest in neurosurgery started in college, I'd say. My neighbor growing up is a neurosurgeon, and my dad was just kind of hanging outside on the block one day, and he was walking by, and my dad had said, like, oh, Monica's studying neuroscience, like maybe she'll become a brain surgeon one day. And then my neighbor said, yeah, just have her come spend the summer with me. So I spent the summer shadowing this neurosurgeon, and he mostly did spine surgery, a lot under the microscope, which was really cool to see. And I saw one craniotomy the entire summer. And I think from that moment on, I thought, like, oh, I could definitely do this. And I love neuroscience, and I love like the very microscopic aspects of how the nervous system works and how that turns into behavior. But once I got into medical school, I realized that I also am really interested in the pathology of it all, and being in the operating room, especially as a third-year medical student. I did a 1-week rotation in neurosurgery on my like general surgery rotation, and that was the best week of the whole year. I felt very much at home working alongside the PAs and the neurosurgeons, and I just felt like every day brought something new, and it felt exciting and extremely dynamic and challenging. And so I think my interest in neurosurgery really came as a culmination of that early exposure, and just finding people who told me that, you can do this, and you just have to put yourself out there and go for it, and at least just try.
Yeah, no, that's really profound, and I think it highlights kind of the whether you have a home program or not, you still have to go out and find it, and kind of take the risk to see if that's something that you'd want to do. And so I guess as someone that matched into neurosurgery without a home program, what are just kind of your general thoughts? I think for a lot of students who are in this position, they just don't really know where to start.
So I think before I started figuring out, what was missing from my application or what was missing from my experience, I first thought of like, well, if I did have a home program, what would I need? And of course, that would be an entire department. But it's also the years of research, as Dr. Johnson said, is really important, and building that network and all that support that you need in order to get to even really be recognized as this is a really strong applicant and you should give him or her a chance. So the first thing was sort of just to create that atmosphere for myself. And within that 1 week of neurosurgery elective, I just, by the end of it, the neurosurgeon and I just sat down with each other, and I said, listen, this feels like exactly where I belong. And the one piece of advice that I got during that week that I think has really stuck with me is, it didn't even come from a neurosurgeon. It came from a vascular surgeon. And she said, if you can't imagine yourself doing anything else, then you have to do that thing, like you're not really given a choice, because you can either, well, of course you're given a choice, but you can either choose to have the lifestyle and the job that you think you want and be unhappy the entire time, or work really hard and have a really fulfilling job and absolutely love what you do. But, it's exhausting work. It's very intimidating. But as soon as she told me that, I just felt like, I really can't imagine myself doing anything else. And so I kind of just went full force into creating all of the resources I felt like I needed to succeed. And so within that week, when I sat down with the neurosurgeon, I said, this is what I see myself doing. And he agreed. And that, having that sort of validation was a really big first step, where I felt like, well, here's one person who will support me. And then I was at NYU in Brooklyn, and they had just acquired that hospital, and the neurosurgeon I was with said, why don't you go over to Tisch and work with the department over there? And they're always, they're really productive, and there's always work to do, and there's always an opportunity. So plus you like get to stay home and be next to your family and all that. So I said, sure. And then I sent a few emails, and luckily everyone had responded to me, and they really, I think part of it is seeking the opportunity, but also I think I absolutely think that luck is part of it too, because there had been an opportunity there for me to take. So I just felt like kind of all the pieces were falling together, and that everything was working out in my favor, and I had to pursue it.
So this was for your research year between third and fourth year. Is that what you're referring to?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So did you, for me, when some connections with the department at University of Colorado, but I still had to take that step and, build a relationship with the folks in the department, and ultimately out of thin air in some ways. And so was there an element of like cold calling or anything like that? Or is it more just like you building relationships with the circle that you were in, and then taking advantage of those opportunities as they arose?
I would say it's more of the latter.
Mm.
Yeah, it definitely took some initiative on my part, but I don't think I would have felt confident taking that initiative if I didn't have the support from those one or two neurosurgeons,
Yeah. Right.
And to have them back me up, even if they had only known me for a brief period of time, like that, plus the eagerness that I probably showed in my interview with my mentors, I think that made them more agreeable to taking me on for the year. And I had a similar experience. The opportunity was definitely there, but my job or my responsibilities throughout the year really, they evolved throughout the year. So I was picking up more opportunities and more projects as the year went along. And I had a good mixture of clinic time and research time, which just made my experience so much more valuable and comprehensive. And I felt like I had so much more to talk about, not only in my interviews, but even to this day when I encounter a patient and I recall previous patients and previous ways of managing them and their care. And it's just my scope and my understanding of what we can do for a patient is much more broadened because of that experience. So it's definitely everything I learned in that year, I've been carrying for 2 to 3 years after.
It definitely doesn't cross any boundaries to ask people, in my opinion. I mean, most neurosurgeons, especially in their academics, part of their interest in their career is helping develop the future of the field, help develop the people that will become the future of the field, so to speak. So I think it's always reasonable to ask and reach out and say, hey, is there opportunities to shadow or visit your institution? It varies institution to institution what the rules are.
Right.
And it may be something you have to work to set up some sort of formal rotation or something like that. But generally speaking, I think that's the way to go, is you have to become somewhat interconnected in a bit of an unconventional way with all these people, rather than the standard, they're at your medical school and you can kind of just go hang out with the residents and attend grand rounds whenever you want to kind of have some exposure to these people. So, whatever unconventional-ish ways you can think of doing it, or conventional, spending some time with them earlier in your medical school, and you may have some time to do that, but all that just is going to be related to reaching out to these people and seeing if there's any way you can think of to interact with them more than you normally would. I mean, in my mind, the meetings are pretty interesting ways to do it, but it's very superficial because you don't get to work with them. So like you guys are saying, I don't know, even asking someone on social media, hey, do you have any projects laying around that you need someone to work on? I mean,
right.
any of these types of things. And then you all of a sudden you kind of establish some sort of relationship because you got to talk about that project and this kind of thing. I mean, I think all of these things are quite viable ways to interact. And I think from a person that doesn't have the home program, you just have to think of these types of things. Definitely leverage anyone at your medical school that does neurosurgery and their connections to introduce you to people and I mean, to the best that you can. If you don't have a department, you probably still have neurosurgeons that work at the hospital where your medical school is, and leverage those people to get you in contact with people they know. And it had to be a game of creativity, though. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. I was told one time by a good mentor of mine back when I was in like medical school, Scott Sangster, if you're out there, I'm going to send you a shout out. But he said that it's not even, it's, the saying is, it's not what you know, it's who you know, but he goes one further, and it's who knows you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is more important than ever, I think, in neurosurgery. And one thing that I've really grasped on through my short amount of time doing this is that no connection should be left unturned. I mean, even if it's a minor connection that you would think is not going to get you anywhere, and they know someone that might know someone who could potentially know someone down the road.
Mm-hmm.
You should definitely try to foster that and get that fourth level connection somehow, because people and there's actually research out there that I've read on, and people are pretty responsive and are willing to help you. But I think we're just wired to just expect to be shut down in a lot of ways. One of those reasons, because neurosurgery is so competitive. And so, I always go back to like, what is the end? So you need your letters. You need 4 letters of rec, maybe 3. 2 of those absolutely need to be from a department chair or a program director. And, you need a certain amount of publications. The average for 2019 and 2020 is in the 15 to 20 range. And you need your board scores and all of those things. And one thing that doesn't get, so you got to get those at the bare minimum. And so I guess for Monica, do you think that a research year is absolutely necessary for someone without a home program? Because I think you and I have taken the tact where we're going to take the year and make sure that we've got everything that we need to hit those numbers. But, there are people out there that don't take that research year, and where that line is for people trying to make that decision.
I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I would say it is if you don't feel like you're competitive enough of an applicant. If you don't have that network, and if you don't have the publications or the experience really to vouch for your interest, then I think taking a year off to do research and clinical work there are many benefits to it. First being is you can spend a year deciding if this is really something that you want for yourself. And then the second is you get to build the network and the connections and your CV in order to be competitive enough of an applicant to really give yourself a fair shot.
Right.
I think one really important thing about picking where you're going to do research is that not all research is the same. It looks the same on your CV potentially, but I think all of this discussion kind of comes back to that this is a small field and it's who you know. So I would heavily encourage people that are going to take a whole year of their life to do research in order to prepare to potentially match in a subspecialty, to do that ideally for a mentor who is a neurosurgeon and is a program director or chair or something along those lines, are very close to it, where not only can you do the actual research, but you can combine that with experience clinically, like Monica was saying earlier. And also you would have an advocate that knows you very well, who's very prominent, who can, their word really goes a long way.
Right.
I think all those things would be fantastic criteria to think about when you're looking for in a research year like you guys are describing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Right. And that's the one thing that doesn't come up in the data, right? Which is the phone calls that are happening, across the country. You say you're interested in these 5 programs, and I want to be at University of Colorado, for instance, but maybe I'm interested in a couple others, and are folks willing to go to bat for you because you made yourself known within the department? Those are the things that just don't show up. And I think that's one of the big daunting things for students without home programs, is because they don't have that baseline for a baseline pool of resources that they can just pull from and just shoot an email to the coordinator and be like, hey, can I spend time in your guys' cadaver lab? Can I just hang out with the residents and that sort of thing? And so whether that's cold calling, emailing, doing it respectfully, but if you feel like you don't have those resources, then finding ways to build them and get those resources is important. And research here is a good way to do that. Another good way to do that is on your sub-Is and your interviews. And did you have what was your strategy from your fourth year rotation standpoint in terms of, how many sub-Is you felt like you needed to do, where you wanted to do them, that sort of thing?
So I ended up doing a total of 4 sub-Is, which I think is a pretty healthy amount for someone who doesn't have a home program. And my strategy, so I had a strategy going into it, and then as soon as the applications get sent out, spots fill up and deadlines approach, and you realize that you still need this one more test, but you can't get the doctor's appointment. So it ends up being it gets crazy and kind of scattered. So I ended up applying to probably about 10 or 12. And like I said, I did 4, and 3 of them actually ended up being in New York, which worked out because ultimately I wanted to match in New York to be close to my family. But one thing that I think really that applicants should look out for is if you do have a really strong interest in a subspecialty, like for me, it's endovascular, doing a sub-I at a place that has a really high volume of that specific subspecialty could be really great exposure, because chances are that if they have really high volume, you're going to see a lot of really interesting cases. And a lot of those, I got asked on interviews quite a lot, like, what was the most interesting case that you saw at this place or that place? Or what procedure or operation do you remember the most? So it was interesting to be in high volume places for that respect. But also feel like I had a good mix of urban hospitals versus more suburban hospitals versus hospitals that are covering, like a 200-mile radius. So I felt like I had a really good mix of patient population and pathology and experience overall.
So that highlights a important point, which is being strategic about your sub-Is. And did you apply that same technique or strategy towards doing things like conferences, like academic conferences? I mean, did you go to anything like that? How did you meet people in the field besides just through the research here and in your circles in New York?
I attended a few conferences. I went to both CNS and AANS the year that I took my research year. One, because I had the time, but 2, because I had actually submitted abstracts and had presentations there. And it definitely takes a lot of creativity and a lot of confidence. You have to muster a lot of confidence in order to just approach someone and say, hey, I'm familiar with your work. Like, I'm really interested in what you're doing. By the way, I'm also applying this year and I'm interested in so-and-so program. Like, can you please keep an eye out for my application, or can I have your email in order to touch base closer to when applications go out and during interview season? It definitely took me out of my comfort zone, because I don't really consider myself someone very good at asking for help, but also asking for things in general. I'm very shy about that. So it took a lot for me to really put myself out there and sort of advocate for myself. But having all the support system and all of my advocates back in New York to vouch for me just gave me that much more confidence and made me feel like, well, I have a whole network of neurosurgeons that are saying that I'm worth giving a shot to. So if you're not going to listen to me, you can at least listen to them.
Yeah, I'm copying down what you just said right now. So when I'm in that position, I can just look down and read it. So, I mean, Dr. Johnson, do you think, I've heard differing things on whether or not events like conferences or that sort of thing are important. I think that there's a lot to traveling, and there's obviously a cost involved and that sort of thing. I mean, do you think that those things are worth students? I mean, really for anyone, but certainly for students without home programs.
Yeah, I mean, I think is it the crucial piece of your application? No. But I think all these things, all the exposures that you have, even if they're small and brief, are data points. And to some degree, you just never know, like the person you meet that you may see back around again, in an interview later, and they remember you. Oh yeah, I remember that person. It just makes you more familiar to them than, just someone they've never met before. So it may not seem like a huge deal to stand in a group of people and be introduced to a few other attendings or residents at other programs, but and it may never amount to anything, but I think all these data points are kind of add up over time. I know I've seen people at meetings who have gone on to see interviews and things like that, and not that I really spoke to them in any kind of linked or was impressed by them, but just I was like, oh yeah, I recognize you from the meeting. It kind of gives you the sense that they're a little bit part of the club, or part of the field, even if they're not yet, And so, and then other things may be more meaningful. I mean, maybe you end up at a dinner with a group of people, and some of them are, in either residents or attendings in programs. And this happens all the time at courses and dinners after courses. So, I think I can't tell you it's extraordinarily critical. I do think that anytime you have this exposure and to the field and you're around everyone, then I think it's a net positive, as long as you're, behaving appropriately and that kind of thing.
Right.
Now, whether it's worth the cost or not, it's hard to say.
Right.
But I do think in general that anytime you're around these people, it's a good idea. The people that are already in the field, either training or as attendings.
Right. So I kind of want to switch gears just a little bit. And so, Monica, not only are you don't have a home program, but you're also a DO student. And I'm curious if there's anything that you want to talk about with that specifically. There are so few DOs that match into neurosurgery, and just curious if you have any thoughts on that, whether or not it came up on interviews, or anything that you want to say to that end for students who may be in that boat.
It definitely came up on interviews. I would say, it was probably the most common question. I very often found myself being the only DO in the room, not only as an applicant, but also like with regards to the attending interviewing me or the residents interviewing me. And I think at first it was intimidating, but over time I realized that I think there's definitely a stigma about DO versus MD. But if there's anything I've learned in my research here and going through interviews and meeting all these people, is that I think as a medical student, especially as one who wants to pursue neurosurgery, you're going to be a hard worker. And at the end of the day, that if you took away my letters and took away everyone else's letters and just compared our CVs, or compared how much we care about neurosurgery and how passionate we really are very similar. So I think for me, it took a lot to realize that even though there's a stigma and I'm told that I'm different, I didn't really feel like I was any different. I felt like I deserved to be there as much as anyone else. And sort of getting that confidence and portraying that in the interviews, I think took away some of that stigma. I mean, granted, there were interviews where I got very rude comments about being a DO, almost insults. And then there were others where they're generally interested in, what's different between a DO and an MD, and how has that affected your care for patients. And so I got the whole range, but you kind of just take it as it comes. And if throughout just the conversation between three of us, I realized that the one thing that keeps popping in my head is, if you don't ask, the answer is always going to be no. So you always have to give yourself the opportunity to succeed. And if the answer is no, you can at least say that you asked. But otherwise, you really just have to go for it. And whether you're DO or an MD, that's the best advice that I can give any medical student.
And I would extend that to life. I mean, I think that's a perfectly said. I really do think if you want something, that you just can't be in the mindset you're going to sit back and let it happen for you. It has to be an active process, not in an obnoxious way, but just an act of working towards it as smartly and it's like in a methodical way as you possibly can, just kind of continuously looking for doors to open. And then when it opens, you go through it, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Bust down those doors.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
politely.
if people say no, like I don't have an opportunity, you can't be like, come on,
Let me in.
Right.
are you kidding me? But when someone's like, hey, yeah, no, we have an opportunity for whatever, and if you think that's a really good advancement for you, then go. And then, like you said, you get to know the right people, and you just have to. But you can't just be expecting someone to call you and invite
Right.
you to some amazing opportunity.
Right. You definitely have to be strategic about it, and it doesn't happen overnight. And I think that everyone, other than patience, will get you so far, especially as a medical student. And I think just learning the balance between when to go and when to hold back that's something we're all still learning. But like you said, once the door opens, you have to go through it.
Right. You started your career in the COVID era. Do you have any thoughts about what students without home programs can be doing, in this virtual environment for people who are applying this year? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I think that it's very overwhelming for hospitals to take care of their own faculty and residents during this time. And I think that a lot of people, I've seen it in my own co-residents. There definitely is a different type of mental and emotional burnout as a result of COVID. And I think not only neurosurgery residents, but residents in other programs at New York Med, that burnout is still sort of lingering, and there's still the stress of, this patient's rule out COVID, or this patient has COVID. And it's just very trying times for everyone in medicine right now. And I think that if there's an opportunity for a medical student to take a research year, then I would probably recommend that, because there's so much that's unknown with the application process that waiting a year for everything to simmer down. Granted, we don't know what's going to happen in a year. There could be a second or third wave, and it could be so much worse than now. But I just think that it's been such a shock for everyone that taking the time to step back and let everything settle, and then coming in and trying to, be efficient and get research done and this and that, it's just going to be a much more valuable use of your time, because a lot of research has been on hold, and a lot of, the applications were delayed, and now there's virtual interviews. So I don't really think any of us know what we're getting ourselves into. We have resident meetings with our chairman every couple weeks, and a recent topic of conversation has been, how are we going to recruit applicants, and how are we going to interview applicants, and what's the pre-interview dinner going to be like? Is it going to be Zoom? Are we going to do one? There's just so much that still needs to be figured out, that I think taking a research year wouldn't be that bad of an idea.
People who have decided that they're going to go for it pretty much are set in stone. And I think that I've known a couple of my colleagues who, as a result of COVID, have decided that not just neurosurgery, but other ones as well, and other specialties, that they've decided to do a research year. But for those that have decided that, I'm going to go for it, do you have any thoughts about ways that those students can shine? If you're, as a resident, you're like, oh, I want to work with this person for the next 6 years. What are the things that you're going to be looking for in this virtual environment? Is there anything that students can be thinking about as they go through the next couple months?
Well, to your first point, I think if applicants or medical students have already decided they're going to apply, they're going to go for it, then my first piece of advice is to see it through, and to really put yourself out there and apply to as many programs as you can afford or want to. And in terms of what I would be looking for in an applicant, it's hard, but I think the same applies whether it's virtual or in person. Like, if I can hold a conversation with someone, and if we can get along, I think even though it is virtual, you can still sort of catch other people's energy. So I think I don't think I'm going to know until it happens.
But like Monica very eloquently said, is that you have to, if you really love it, then you can make it happen. And of course, the provision being that board scores, grades, have to reflect your dedication to it, right? Without those things, that's kind of the base of your application. And then you of course have to be a good medical student that looks like they'll become a good dedicated resident. But all those things are aligned, then it is doable. It's just like I said, you have to use some creativity and think outside the box and get all the things you need to have in a competitive application, but it's doable.
Yeah.
Persistence and patience can get you very far, I think, especially in the application process.
It's a good way to end. Our guest has been Monica Mureb. Monica, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Monica. Thanks, Michael.
Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, follow, and leave a comment in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your audio content. Make sure to follow MSNTC and the YNC on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And check out our webpage at neurosurgerytraining.org/TNJ, where you can find other episodes and links and resources related to today's conversation. Be sure to check out the YNC's webinar series and visit their webpage on AANS.org. If you have comments or ideas for episodes, or would like to join us to talk about anything neurosurgery related, our email address is tnjpodcast@neurosurgerytraining.org. We'd love to hear from you. Finally, I'd like to thank Matt Rosenthal, one of our fantastic MSNTC volunteers, for helping with the editing and processing, and also thank all the fabulous people involved in this project. Have a great day, and we look forward to next time.
Hey everyone, Ryan Rad here from neurosurgerytraining.org. If you like that video, subscribe and donate to keep our content available for medical students across the world.